Hello, my name is Chelsey Byers Gerstencker, and I work for University of Illinois Extension, and I am presenting today's presentation on behalf of the North Central Region Aging Network. Today we're going to talk about communication challenges and strategies for helping people with dementia. We're going to look at understanding the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia, identifying behaviors that can cause caregivers, friends, and visitors stress, identify common communication problems individuals have with dementia, and then learn strategies for better interactions and visits. This first slide I want to show you isn't really about noticing all the facts and figures because they're quite small on here, but you can go look these up at www.alz.org. But really what I want you to know is that in 2018, there were over 5.7 million Americans living with Alzheimer's disease and 16.1 million Americans providing unpaid care to those individuals. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. I spent over 5 years working as a certified therapeutic recreation specialist on an Alzheimer's unit. From there, I got my master's in gerontology, and then I spent a couple years working for the Alzheimer's Association out of St. Louis. Through this job, I taught all kinds of professionals more about understanding Alzheimer's and the various dementias, as well as helping them in their various careers and jobs, whether they worked for long-term care, assisted living, adult day services, or even the St. Louis County police officers. But one thing that I think is really important as we begin is to really look at the difference between the word dementia and Alzheimer's. Today I might use those two terms interchangeably, but it is something for us to understand the difference between those terms because as a professional we often do throw those around interchangeably, but they are a little bit different. So first, if you think of the word dementia, I want you to think of it as a generic term, just like if I said I had soup for lunch today. So if I had soup for lunch today, you would know a couple things about what I had for lunch. You would know it was probably served warm in a bowl. I probably used a spoon to eat it. It may have been creamy or brothy. It might have had vegetables or noodles. It might have been chunky. It might have had meat. It may not have. But it doesn't tell you what specific type of soup I've had. So when we think of the word dementia, think of the generic term, whereas Alzheimer's is one specific type of dementia. So, you know, there's many different types of soup, just like there's many different types of dementia. But when we think about the word dementia, it just means that somebody has, some common symptoms going on. 2, 3, 4 of these symptoms usually mean that something is going on with a person. Some of these symptoms include memory issues, specifically short-term memory, confusion with time, place, or people, so orientation issues, problem-solving issues. Sometimes they make poor judgment or poor decisions that could potentially be unsafe. Communication issues, which we're going to talk about today, so maybe word finding, following conversation, or using the wrong words. Issues with contrast in colors, maybe getting lost in familiar places, so these are visual spatial issues. Difficulties with familiar tasks, such as their activities of daily living, so things like dressing, cooking, bathing, feeding oneself, going to the bathroom, those kind of activities. And then sometimes people have issues with mood changes, so changes in personality, mood, or behavior. So again, the word dementia is a generic term, but Alzheimer's is one type of dementia. There's many types of different dementias. On the screen here, I just have some of the more common of them listed. And we're not really going to go into these today. But one thing to know is if your loved one would get diagnosed and the doctor says your loved one has dementia, it would be important for you to ask, well, what type of dementia? And the reason is because they do progress a little bit differently. They have some different characteristics to them. Some medications work for some better than others, as well as, it is just good for us to know what our loved ones have. As if we're in the care field, it is also good for us to kind of know more about each of these different types of dementia. At the very bottom left of the screen, reversible dementias is something that I do want to highlight here. Oftentimes families are concerned about really being told that their loved one has dementia or Alzheimer's, and so they prolong or put off going to see a doctor. And really, we really do need to encourage people to go get, an assessment done sooner than later, because sometimes people have these symptoms. They're presenting with confusion, memory issues, and maybe some word, issues with communication, and what they really have is a reversible dementia. So maybe it's something like an infection that has gone untreated. Maybe it is medication interaction. Maybe their B12 is super low. So there are some things that once the person goes through a full assessment, they can rule out some things, and they're going to do some tests, and they might find out that somebody really has something that they can cure, attack, do something with to get them back to their normal, healthy self. But infections is one that really goes undetected for a while that can really kind of show those symptoms of dementia sometimes. So now I want to show you a couple slides, and we're going to go through these quickly, but to show you really what's going on with the brain. And we really can't look at the brain until death, and so these are pictures after death. And if you look at the normal brain on the left, it is thick, healthy, it has like plump. But if you look at the brain on the right, it has shown atrophy. So there has been cellular death, the neurons have died, and it's actually shrunk due to that death. If you look at the picture on the right-hand side, it has like cuts of the brain, and it can kind of show you a normal brain as it goes through the stages of Alzheimer's, so early, middle, and late. And so the brain is actually shrinking as the person goes through the disease process, because Alzheimer's is slow and progressive, and so the neurons are dying. Here's another slide to show you some different pictures that's going on. Sometimes these pictures are really good for families to see, though they can be very hard for people to see. But sometimes our loved ones or people we work with in the professional field will say, well, he could really do this yesterday. I know he can do it today. But we need to remember, people have good days and bad days, and there really is something going on in the brain, and sometimes they really cannot do it. And so, we need to be mindful of what the person can and can't do, and just try to be there for them and help them as much as we can without, doing it all for them, because then people kind of have that learned helplessness. In this slide, it's kind of a drawn picture of what you just saw, but this highlights the areas that are most affected by Alzheimer's disease, and those are language and memory. So today we are going to talk a lot about communication. I love this picture. It's got Charlie Brown's teacher, the infamous wah, 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 So when we think about what makes up communication, we might think about, word choice, sentence structure, slang, and nonverbal. So when we think of nonverbal, maybe our body language, our facial expressions, what are our eyes saying? Sometimes, though, people don't think about things such as pitch and tone. So if I asked you out there, what percent of communication is actually words? What percent is tone? What percent is body language? In your head, just try to think what you would answer for that. All right, now you can't see me right now, but I want you to just make an okay sign, kind of like that picture. And what I want you to do is hold it up kind of like outside close to your ear, all right? Now with that okay sign, what I want you to do, actually I am gonna, I want you to, let's see. This is actually not going to work with me not being able to see me now that I think about that. So we're just going to skip this one. But anyway, had you been able to see me, I would have had you told you to put it on your chin, and I would have placed it on my cheek. And you most likely would have put it on your cheek, because people do what they see, not what they hear. And so This would be a good example of, the body language is more important than verbal. And I'm sorry that I am not live today, but I'm at a conference. So I was supposed to be live this morning, but I had to be at a conference, and I was afraid that I wasn't going to have good internet. So I apologize for that. So anyway, this 73855, so words only count for 7%. Now, what would you have answered for the 7%? Would you have answered more than that, though, for communication? Most people typically answer, at least 50, 70, typically when I do this in person. And people are usually pretty surprised when it's only 7%. Tone of voice is actually 38%. Body language is 55. So this 73855 was developed by Professor Albert Mehrabian from UCLA back in the 70s. He and his colleagues studied the importance of this nonverbal communication, and they found that the influence of intonation, so that tone, and that nonverbal, what our bodies give off, is way stronger than people most assume. All right. So when we think about Charlie Brown's teacher, that want, sometimes as somebody progresses through the course of Alzheimer's, we may actually sound like Charlie Brown's teacher to them. They might not understand the words we're saying, but we still have a 93% chance of understanding what they're trying to tell us and what we're trying to tell them, because they listen to our tone and they're looking at our body language. Just like if we don't understand the words they're using, we can still pay attention to their tone and their body language. All right, so now we're going to move on to the different challenges that people have with communication. And the first one is word finding difficulty. So it's not uncommon for somebody to be, standing there, especially this is early on in the disease process. This might even be before you know something's going on. But you might have somebody say, hey, pass me the, the white stuff I put on my potatoes. And they can't come up with the word salt. And so, it's a very common word. And, you might be thinking, well, gee, I sometimes can't think of the word. But a lot of times when we can't think of the right word, it's a word that we don't use commonly. It's not an everyday term, unlike the word salt. Another example might be is somebody might say, where is the thing that I write with? And they're looking for the term pen, and again, that's a very common term that should be in our kind of everyday language. So that can be one of those first signs that something's going on with someone. Repetition is one that we hear so much about. This is so hard for families and professional caregivers. What time is it? 5 minutes later. What time is it? 5 minutes later. What time is it? They really don't realize that they've asked the same thing over and over again. That short-term memory has been affected by the disease, and they can't track that they just asked that question. Or, when is lunch? And they had just had lunch 30 minutes ago. That whole episode of lunch is gone. They just don't remember it. So if somebody's asking something over and over again, we really do need to answer it like it's the first time we heard it. And that can get really hard when you're answering the same thing, 40, 50, 100 times a day. But you really have to kind of be a good actor or actress in the moment and be like, you know what? It is 6:40. 5 minutes later, it is 6:45, and act like it's not the 100th time you've been asked, and not be like, I told you already, you can't have that tone in your voice because they're going to read that tone. The next one is unable to read or understand written communication. Sometimes people will still do things that they've done their whole lives. Like if they like to read the paper, they're going to still maybe enjoy sitting there reading the paper, but they might not actually comprehend what they're reading. So if you come by and be like, hey, what are you reading about? They might not be able to tell you because, again, it might not be sinking in that, that short-term memory can't put that information into that long-term memory anymore. And so it's just like it's reading and then it's gone. Or maybe they're just reading it and they're not comprehending it. So we need to be mindful of that. People often revert back to their native language. So if their native language was Polish or Spanish or, any of the languages, oftentimes people, as they progress through the disease, will revert back to that native language, especially if they're mad. And so it's not uncommon for somebody to, when they're frustrated or they're upset, start speaking in another language. So don't let that catch you off guard. Sometimes people have a loss of ability to speak in clear sentences. So you might have somebody say something like, word, dog, bed, tonight. And you're like, what? And, there's probably something in there that they're trying to tell you. And so you kind of have to dissect it and pull it apart and see what they're really trying to say. Like, are you tired? Do you want to go to bed? Are you looking for your dog? There's something in there, and they're trying to communicate something, or those are the words that just came out. Maybe none of those words are exactly what they were wanting. And oftentimes we might call that word salad. The next one is loss of ability to understand what we're saying. And so that might be a case where we might want to start utilizing our nonverbals more, paying attention to our tone, as well as using triggers, which we're going to talk about a little bit more later. And then they're unable to use, their words. And so, they're still going to want to communicate to you. So you have to be very mindful of their nonverbals. What are they doing? You have to use your eyes to kind of pay attention to what are they telling you, what's going on with them. So what can we do to make this, the best interaction possible? First, use their preferred name. And that might not be their preferred name as an adult. It might be a preferred name from when they were a young adult or maybe even a child. So, maybe they were a doctor as an adult, or, or they always went as Mr., or maybe their formal name is Richard, but as a child they went by Richie. So we kind of need to find out what they're going to answer to. So if they stop answering to the name you're using, you might need to go back to a name that was their childhood name or even a nickname. Minimize distractions. So if you are bringing a whole bunch of people to your house and you're celebrating the holidays and you're trying to have a good conversation with a loved one who has a form of dementia, you know what? It's better to have them in one room and have people come visit them in small numbers. Because if there's a lot of chaos and kids running around and people opening presents, you know what? That's a lot going on for somebody to process if they have any of the forms of dementia. Or if you go visit them in any kind of, living facility, think about, what could be a better option if there's a lot going on in a day room or, in the dining space. It might be better to, bring them into their own room or find a space that's a little quieter. And then also think about, no matter what environment you're in, turning off the TV, turning off the radio, take down some of the distractions to set it up for the best possible success. The next one, I always say, keep it simple, silly. Often we give too much information fast. When I was working at a veterans home, I would say things like, hey, Joe, stand up, put your coat on, let's go down the hall. And that was just way too much information for him to process. We really do need to break things down. We need to break it down one step at a time. Hey, Joe, stand up. Joe stands up. Hey, Joe, let's put your coat on. Joe's going to put his coat on. Hey, we're going to go down the hall, we're going to head outside. So we need to do things one step at a time if we really want to set people up for success. So think about that. Use humor whenever you can. Also, use their interest. I always call this like an ace in your pocket. If they don't want to do something, if they are really stuck on something and you need to distract them. If you know that they loved horses, or that they loved to sing, or that they loved, old Western movies, talk about the things they enjoy. If you know that they love, some kind of Major League Baseball team, talk about what they like. And that's kind of like using their interests to distract them. It's usually a proven winner. Use a prop. Anytime that you can use a prop, use that to trigger their memories. So oftentimes people no longer can ask for what they need. So they might be thirsty, but they can't ask for a drink of water. Or they might need to go to the bathroom, but they can't like think to say, I need to go to the bathroom right now. You're going to see them pacing, you know, around. They need to go, but they can't think about saying, I need to go to the bathroom. So use a prop such as a cup. Like if you're going to say, hey Joe, are you thirsty? Have a cup already in your hand and have the cup out as you're offering it to them. Because then if they can't process the words, you know, thirsty, are you thirsty? They can see the cup triggers drink, and then they can be like, oh yeah, I am thirsty, I want that drink. So anytime you can have a prop, use a prop. You know, it's time to brush your teeth. Have the toothbrush already in your hand, and so they can see the toothbrush. Anytime you can use props to help you, it will trigger their memories, and so that's a really helpful one. You know, take pressure off of them. It's okay to ask simple questions, but you know, if they can't answer the question, first of all, always give them time. They don't process information as quickly as you and I do, so give them time to answer. If they don't answer, then just kind of, you know, take the pressure off of them, you know, like engage in conversation, kind of jump on in. You know, it's just what we do, right? Virginia Bell and David Troxel have an approach called the Best Friends Approach, and this is one of those things where I think it's really helpful. You kind of just jump in like a best friend would, right? You kind of just kind of save them. And so I think that's a good way to think about it, is just treating them like a best friend. Like, what would you do for your best friend in that situation? And then always respect feelings. Remember what I said about tone. Remember that they're an adult. Treat them like an adult. They might need more help than they once did, but don't ever make them feel like a child, and don't ever talk to them like a child, because that is, you know, very demeaning. One time we had a lady who was getting ready to go to dinner time, and we had detailed staff on our unit, and the lady kind of spoke down to her, and she was like, Rosie, it's time for dinner. And Rosie knew she's being talked down to, or not in a tone that was like appropriate. And Rosie looked right up at her and said, Rosie, it's time for dinner, and kind of like gave it back to her. And I loved that, because Rosie wasn't going to take that tone from that lady. So respect their feelings, respect the person as an adult. All right, some more kind of tips and techniques here. Really watch your body language. What are you giving off? Are you giving off the, I don't want to be here? Are you giving off the, I don't know what to do? Are you giving off the, I'm really frustrated with you right now? You know, what does your body say to somebody? Or is it open? Is it welcoming? Is it, you know, I'm here for you? Watch your tone of voice. You know, is your voice saying, I'm frustrated? Is your voice saying, I'm caring and I love you and, you know, it's okay? Watch your gestures and your facial expressions. We say so much with our facial expressions and our eyes. Even silence says a lot. So, you know, next time you want to check with your, tune into some body language and tone, check out some teenagers. I have two that I can let you try that out with. I'll talk about some tone and body language there. And then, you know, some things to avoid. Oftentimes, it isn't that they can't hear us, it is that they don't understand the words we chose. So don't talk louder. We might not have chosen good words. So, you know, think about the word choice. Don't give commands. No adult wants to be told they absolutely have to do something, or demanded something. So think about how you word things. If yes or no is not an option, don't ask a yes or no question. You know, if it was my mom, I wouldn't say, "Hey, mom, do you want to go to the doctor?" because she's probably going to say no, right? So I'm not going to say, Mom, you have to go to the doctor, because then she probably is really going to dig in her heels and be like, nope, not doing it. Instead, I have to think smarter, work smarter, not harder. And I might not even tell her that we're going to the doctor initially. I just need to get her moving, right? So I might say something like, hey, Mom, it's time to go. Or, hey, Mom, we're going to town. Or, hey, Mom, it's time to take a ride. My goal is just to get her into the car, right? And so think about how we place our words, what kind of things we actually ask, because if no is not an option, don't ask a yes or no question. Don't ask too many memory questions. They can be very difficult, especially if it's like lots of them in a row. Again, if it's just conversational, questions are part of conversations, but don't be like, don't be giving them a mini mental exam, every day to see how they're doing. And a mini mental exam is kind of one of those tests that doctors would give somebody to check in on their cognitive functioning. So don't argue. You will never win that argument. They can't reason anymore. So, if somebody wants to go outside and it's 20 degrees outside and there's snow on the ground, you need to think how to get out of that situation. So really, no is probably the answer. They want to go outside. No might be the answer. But really, you need to distract them to get them off that train of thought of wanting to go outside. So let's say it's my mom again, and she's like, I want to go outside. And really, I want to be like, no. But no, again, is not the answer. So I might say something like, hey, not right now. How about we go get some tea and a snack, and let's do that later. And hopefully by the time we have that tea and snack, she has forgotten about that desire to go outside. So I'm using the art of distraction to move past the idea of wanting to go outside, because again, I don't really want to say no to an adult. So think about how you can, again, work smarter, not harder. Try not to correct the person. They just don't remember things quite like we do. Again, they're going to have good days and bad days. Use humor whenever you can. Get information as much as you can from family members if you are a staff member. An example of this is, family members know stuff about the person, about their interests, about what they enjoy, and those are the things that you can use to talk to the person or to kind of that ace in the pocket. And once you know some of that information, you can start engaging them better in conversation, and it really is going to be more helpful to you. And then the last one, avoid those long explanations. Again, that goes back to giving, minimal information and breaking it up into small parts. The next thing I want to talk about is caregiver approach. This is really important. When we talk about behaviors, a lot of times behaviors are set off by the way we approach somebody. Somebody with Alzheimer's processes the world a little bit differently than we do. And so something to think about is how we approach someone. So the first thing is come slowly. We want to kind of be coming from the front. It's good to get their attention. So whether you say their name, kind of rub their arm gently, do something that gets their attention. It's important for you to kind of just be off to the side a little bit, not totally on their side, but not totally in front of them. So kind of at an angle. And the reason that this is important is because if you are straight on to somebody, especially if you're standing and they're seated, it seems very confrontational. And if they're standing and you're standing, it is also confrontational. So it's a much safer, non-threatening thing for you to be kind of to the side a little bit, and then get down on their level. So if they're seated, pull up a chair. If you can bend down, because that's kind of where their visual field is. So if you kind of put your arms out to the side and you can kind of see where your fingers are, so like arms stretched out straight to the side, kind of move your arms in just so where you see them on your peripheral vision. And then as somebody goes through the disease process, so, early, middle, late stage, if you're a ballerina, kind of make a ballerina pose where you put your two fingertips together in front of you. So kind of chest level, fingertips together. Their visual field, like ours, starts out to the side, and as they go through the disease process, it kind of shrinks into that ballerina right in front of them. So as we kind of come upon them, we might not actually be in their visual field when we think we are, and so we could startle them. So kind of think about, where are we in proximity to the person, and are we startling them? If you've ever seen somebody kind of recoil from you, if you have approached them, you've probably startled them. Something to think about, as a caregiver, you set the tone. So if we're rushed, we're going to kind of set it off on a bad note. You set the tone, they set the speed. We cannot hurry them up, okay? If you're frustrated, they're going to be frustrated. If you get angry, they're going to give you angry. So you have to think about, what is the tone you want this interaction to be, because you're going to set the tone and they're going to set the speed. Another thing to think about when you think about approach, caregiver approach, is really think about somebody in a wheelchair. I've seen this. I saw this when I worked at a veterans home. I saw this when we did consulting through the Alzheimer's Association. Staff members are thinking about their task a lot of times, and personal caregivers, family caregivers too. We think, hey, we need to get this person somewhere. We come up behind them and we just start pushing. We didn't tell them where they were going. We didn't ask them if it was okay. There was no really interaction or permission. And as adults, we kind of want to know what's going on with our physical space. And so it's something that we need to think about. So when you approach somebody who's in a wheelchair, you need to kind of come around to the front and let them know a couple things and say, like, hey, I'm going to take you down the hall to the dining room, or I'm going to take you to the kitchen. It's time to eat lunch. Because if not, if we don't give them any heads up that we're going to start moving them and we just start pushing them, they do a couple things instinctually. They're going to try to reach behind and find you back there. They know you're back there. They're going to try to hit you. They're going to push their feet down and try to stop the wheelchair if they don't have their feet up on the little feet guards, or they're going to try to grab the wheels. And if they try to put their feet down or try to grab the wheels, they are really at risk of hurting themselves. So we really need to be mindful of that. So some common behaviors, as you look at the screen, we are not going to go through each of these individually. You can find a great handout on the Alzheimer's Association's website, or you can email me and I can attach one to an email, and I'll give you my email at the very end. They have a great listing that kind of goes through like understanding each of these behaviors. But there's some things I do want to mention about behaviors. Oftentimes, we need to think of a behavior as like, what is the trigger or what's causing it? Because we kind of need to solve it. So these are some of the reasons people have behaviors. The first one is simply the disease process. There are actual changes going on in the brain that's causing the issue. And as I say these, you can kind of look at this list and kind of think about, oh yeah, I can see how that would be the reason for this. The second one is unmet needs. So the person is trying to tell us something. So they need something physically. Maybe they need to go to the bathroom, they're hungry, they're tired. Just think of those basic needs that somebody needs, that can make them unhappy. Or their psychosocial needs that are unmet. So, I'm bored, I'm overstimulated. I feel like I haven't contributed to anything today and I feel kind of worthless. I kind of feel like I haven't given love or haven't received love. So what's going on with their, physical and social self? Do they have unmet needs? The third one is what's going on in the environment. This kind of goes with the unmet needs. Maybe there's too much or too little stimulation, so kind of assess the environment. Maybe they're not comfortable. Just like us, maybe it's too hot or too cold. Maybe their body is positioned uncomfortably, right? So they're not comfortable, how they're sitting or in their space. Another one, number 4, is pain. This is a huge one. Many people who have a form of dementia have untreated pain because, again, just like they can't ask for that drink of water, they're not telling you that they have pain. So we need to be really mindful of their nonverbals. Are they trying to communicate to us that they're in pain? Are they, holding their head? Are they like rubbing something to say, ah, this hurts? Like, are they rubbing their knees and you know that they have arthritis? So look to see if somebody is showing wincing, rubbing something, holding something. Look for the signs that somebody's in some discomfort. They might just need, some kind of like everyday pain relief to kind of give them some comfort. Something to think about there. The next one is communication. They're trying to communicate something to us and they can't get it across, or we're trying to communicate and they're not understanding. Of course it's going to be frustrating, right? Of course it's going to be aggravating. And then the next one is caregiver approach. We did something to set them off, which I just kind of talked about. So when we think about these behaviors are only a problem when safety or well-being of the individual or another person is compromised. I'm going to say that again. Behaviors are only a problem when safety or well-being of the individual or another person is compromised. You know what? Behaviors are mostly a nuisance. So, they're a nuisance to us as caregivers. They become a lot of work, but a lot of times they're not really a problem. So try to figure out what the cause is of the behavior, because really you want to solve the problem. What is the problem? And if you can find the trigger, you can a lot of times solve the behavior. An example of that is we had a gentleman who every day before dinner would get naked in our dining room. And, we were like, oh, well, okay, this isn't great. And so what happened is we say, hey, it's almost time for dinner. And we'd turn around and he'd be naked. And so once we talked to his wife, we found out that his life routine was, he was did a job where he was dirty, and so he came home every day and he'd sit down, have, a glass of tea or something to drink, and then his wife would say, hey, it's almost time for dinner, and that was his cue to go take a shower and get cleaned up for dinner. So by us saying, hey, it's almost time for dinner, we triggered a life routine, right? And so in his head, he was like, I should do something. And so he knew something should happen, but he couldn't do it in his head anymore, what should happen. So he got naked knowing that he should get cleaned up, but he couldn't quite finish the whole process, right? So once we knew that that was his life routine, we knew to say, hey, it's almost time for dinner. Let's go get you cleaned up. We'd take him to his bedroom. We would get him all cleaned up for dinner. We brought him back out. Now he's clean. He has done what he's done his entire life. And now he's ready for dinner, and he's no longer naked in our dining room every day. Another example is we had a gentleman we always found on the floor in his bedroom, halfway underneath his bed, and we had to report it as a fall because we found him on the ground. But what we realized was he was always tinkering under his bed, like on his back with his body halfway under his bed. He was a mechanic, and so if you asked him what he was doing, he'd say he was working on cars. And so once we realized that he was working on cars, he wasn't falling every day. He was fulfilling his sense of occupation. And so, he was doing his job. And so we had to just check on him, be like, hey, Richard, what are you doing? I'm working on a car. Okay. And so then we had a chart that he was working on. We found him at such and such time under his bed. We checked on him. He, quote, was working on a car. And then we'd go back and check on him, in so much time. And so, that was his life behavior. So it wasn't really a behavior. It was maybe a nuisance. I don't even want to call it a nuisance. I mean, it was just his life, right? So that was his home. We had to figure that out. And speaking of home, we had a gentleman who was nonverbal in the sense of he couldn't use words, but only certain people in our facility could wear ball caps. And whenever these certain occupations came through our unit, he would get so upset. And he would track them with his eyes from the time they walked into our unit until they left the unit, and he'd go, and he would follow them, and you could tell he was so upset by them, and we could not figure it out for the life of us. Like, why did he not like these certain people? And one day, his family member was in, and we said, hey, any idea why he's doing this? And she goes, they have a hat on inside the home. And he goes, no one should have a hat on inside the home. And so that was his home. And so we had to post signs outside the doors that said, please remove your hat upon entering. And that was for anybody, visitors, workers, anybody, because guess what? That was their home. And once we instituted that, he never got upset again because people, well, I shouldn't say never, but that didn't trigger his behavior anymore. There was no longer that daily upset because of those people who worked in, our engineering people and our, janitorial staff, the people who were allowed to wear hats, they were no longer allowed to wear hats when they were on our unit. And so, it's finding out what the trigger is to the behavior, intervening, preventing it, and then you'll have less behaviors. So this kind of goes on to that psychosocial needs that I mentioned. Tom Kitwood is a pioneer in person-centered care, and he developed this model on how to support people with Alzheimer's, and he says that if we can meet these kind of 6 basic fundamental needs, that we will see healthier people with less behaviors. And these are really pretty basic things. So making people feel loved, kind of having those basic needs met of comfort, keeping them warm, dry, clean, not thirsty, full bellies and pain-free. Giving them a sense of identity, having people have choice. And when you give people choice, say, do you want to wear your red sweater or your blue sweater today? So minimizing the choice, but still having choice, not like, what do you want to wear in your closet? Because that would be too much choice. So making it choice, but manageable choice. Doing things that people are interested in, giving them the opportunity to do that. Having, inclusion, making people feel a part of something, making them feel that they are a part of something bigger. And then attachment, having them connected to people, pets, groups. So even through the disease process, people need these 6 basic needs. So something to think about if we're giving care or we're working with family members. And then I'm just going to wrap up here with some everyday solutions. Just remember that we need to have a calm tone and we need to match their pace. And then some common things that I heard a lot, I heard when I did some consulting, people often say, where is my mom? This can go a couple different ways. If somebody says, where is my mom? I always ask groups when I teach, what does a mom give to somebody? And so, if you think like, what is a mom? Moms bring love, security, and safety. So if somebody says, where is my mom? They are looking for exactly that. They are looking for love, safety, and security. So this can go down a couple different ways. You can be like, hey, your mom's dead, and they're going to grieve it like they just found out their mom died, and that's going to be awful. So I don't suggest that. I would suggest one of 2 things. Either say, you know what, tell me about your mom, and let them tell you about their mom. I would say, you know what, everything's okay. I'm here with you. You're safe. Reassure them. Or say, you know what, your mom is at home. She's cooking. She's doing things that, give them a scenario that would be realistic for that person, that's believable. Because I call it, in the field they call it therapeutic lies. It's really hard for family members sometimes. They say they don't want to lie to family members. And in that case, when people say that, I say just use the tell me about your mom situation. So then they can tell you about their mom, and then you can tell them about your mom, and then you're trying to distract them. And then at some point, maybe somebody says, oh, my mom likes to play cards. And then you can say, oh, what kind of card games do you like to play? And then now you're talking about cards, and now you're not talking about mom anymore. And you kind of try to work your way off the topic. And so, it's just something to think about. Another one is, I want to go home. This one's really common. Even if they are living in their current home, they're thinking of a home that either they grew up in or a home that they raised their kids in. It's not their current home. And so even if we said this is their home, that is kind of confusing to them, because if they say I want to go home, they clearly are not thinking that this is home. So we need to think of a way to work around that. So again, you could say, tell me about home, who lives at home, There's some questions that you can talk about there. And again, they're expressing a need. So you don't want to say things like, this is your home, because then they have to try to process that and make that make sense, and that's confusing. And then they might say things like, well, no, it's not, you're lying, and now they don't like you, and then it's going to just be bad. So think about how you can talk about their home and try to kind of work your way off that subject, but reassure them that they are okay, because again, home is safety, home is love. And then, you need to think about when they ask certain questions, and I did this wrong. If somebody says, have you seen my son? And this happened to me, and I was, 22, fresh out of college when I started my job. And I was thinking of the adult son, the gentleman on the right, the guy who worked at the bank. And I just said to the gentleman who I was caring for on the Alzheimer's unit, I said, oh, yeah, your son, he's at work, and, I bet he's going to come see you this weekend. And I was living in the here and now. And I should have asked questions like, tell me about your son. And when he said, little Billy, I would have been cued in that we are not talking about the gentleman, the picture on the right. We're talking about the little guy on the left, right? So it's always good to ask questions, and you're going to get to know what they're talking about and know where their reality is right now. And we need to live in their reality because we cannot bring them to our reality. So whether that be 2019, we can't bring them to 2019. So we need to be where they are in their journey. And so just go to them in that journey. Again, whenever you can, try to use that art of distraction and redirection. I think I've given you some pretty good examples of that. But, it's really hard sometimes when somebody's stuck on something. But if you can kind of redirect them or distract them to get them off whatever that is, that will work into your favor. Offer snacks, sing a song, say a prayer, do an activity, ask them for their help. Those are all great things to help them, to distract them or redirect them. And then I just want to leave you with these last kind of tips for caregiving. Prevention is best. Once you know what triggers behaviors, you can sometimes prevent them. Again, watch your approach, your approach. Watch your communication skills. What are your verbals and nonverbals? What are your tone? What is your nonverbal giving off? Validate what they're feeling. Validate what they're giving to you. Redirect and distract as you can or need. Simplify their environment. Set them up for success. Try to honor their routines. I gave you a couple examples of routines today in my examples. If somebody liked to shower in the morning, try to keep that routine. Just kind of like when we go to a hotel, things are just off. We don't sleep as well. We don't have the fan that we're used to, or, our pillows aren't quite right. Anytime you can try to honor routines or things that keep things as much as the same as possible, it's going to be better. And then again, simplify things. Break things down into steps. Don't give them more than they can do, but one step at a time. But still, let them do as much for themselves as possible for as long as possible. If we do it all for them, we are going to make them dependent on us, and it's a learned helplessness. So make sure it's a fine line, and it's really hard, and there's going to be good days and bad days, so there are going to be days they can do it, and then there's going to be days where we need to intervene a little bit more, and then the next day might be another better day, but then as they progress through the disease, we are going to need to do a little bit more and a little bit more. But if we jump in and we try to do a lot from the get-go, they're going to be reliant on us. And so we kind of need to find that nice balance to help them as they need it, but still encourage them to do as much for themselves as possible. I just want to leave you with this poem here. There are wonderful places to get help. I already mentioned the Alzheimer's Association. There's also the Family Caregiver Alliance, and that is www.caregiving.org. And then if somebody ever is looking for placing a loved one in a care community, U of I Extension does have a website called Long-Term Care, Talking, Deciding, Taking Action. And the website for that is www.ltca.org. www.longtermcare.illinois.edu, and it has some nice checklists and things to think about that might help a family member kind of think about what they want to look for when they're visiting different sites and things like that, and questions to ask to get more information before they make that decision. Here's some information that I will leave up on the screen. If you would like a summary handout, there is a website here, goillinois.edu/ALZ_, you can't see the underscore, but there's an underscore communication. And then INCRAN is doing an evaluation on all of these sessions. So we'd really appreciate if you're listening in that you'd go fill out the evaluation. And it's tinyurl.com/INCRAN survey. If you guys have any questions, I went through this kind of quickly, and I'm sorry that I am not live today to answer questions, but feel free to reach out to me. I'm very passionate about this topic, and I am happy to answer questions or connect you to additional resources. Thank you for tuning in, and on behalf of INCRAN, thank you, and we appreciate you listening in.